कीर्तनः हृदयन्तस्थो ह्यभद्राणि विदुनोति सुहृत्सतां नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवय भगवतिरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 30, Text 31 and 32. Prabhu, shall I share?
Go ahead, Prabhu.
Yeah. Text 31. Eka prapadyate dhvantam hitvedam swakalevaram kushaletarapateyo bhutadrohena yadbhritam. एकः प्रपद्यते ध्वान्तं हित्वेदं स्वकलेवरं कुशलेतरपातेयो भूतद्रोहेण यद्भृतम्. एकः प्रपद्यते ध्वान्तं हित्वेदं स्वकलेवरं कुशलेतरपातेयो भूतद्रोहेण यद्भृतम्. Synonyms: Ekah, alone. Prapadyate, he enters. Dvantam, darkness. Hitva, after quitting. Idam, this. Swa, his. Kalevaram, body. Kushala itara, sin. Pateyaha, his passage money. Bhuta, to other living entities. Drohena, by injury. Yat, which body. Britam, was maintained. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. He goes alone to the darkest regions of hell after quitting the present body, and the money he acquired by envying other living entities is the passage money with which he leaves the world. Purport. When a man earns money by unfair means and maintains his family and himself with that money, the money is enjoyed by many members of the family, but he alone goes to hell. A person who enjoys life by earning money or by envying others' life and who enjoys with family and friends will have to enjoy alone the resultant sinful reactions accrued from such violent and illicit life. For example, if a man secures some money by killing someone and with that money maintains his family, those who enjoy the black money earned by him are also partially responsible and are also sent to hell. But he who is the leader is especially punished. The result of material enjoyment is that one takes with him the sinful reactions only and not the money. The money he earned is left in this world and he takes only the reaction. In this world also, if a person acquires some money by murdering someone, the family is not hanged, although its members are sinfully contaminated. But the man who commits the murder and maintains his family is himself hanged as a murderer. The direct offender is more responsible for sinful activities than the indirect enjoyer. The great learned scholar Chanakya Pandita says, therefore, that whatever one has in his possession had better be spent for the cause of Sat, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because one cannot take his possessions with him. They remain here and they will be lost. Either we leave the money or the money leaves us, but we will be separated. The best use of money, as long as it is within our possession, is to spend it to acquire Krishna consciousness. Text 32. दैवेनासादितं तस्य शमलं निरये पुमान् भुङ्क्ते कुटुम्बपोषस्य हृतवित्त इवातुरः. दैवेनासादितं तस्य क्षमलं निरये पुमान् भुङ्क्ते कुटुम्बपोषस्य हृतवित्त इवातुरः. दैवेनासादितं तस्य शमलं निरये पुमान् भुङ्क्ते कुटुम्बपोषस्य हृतवित्त इवातुरः. Daivena, by the arrangement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Asaditam, obtained, Tasya, his, Shamalam, sinful reaction, Niraye, in a hellish condition, Puman, the man, Bhunkte, undergoes, Kutumba Poshasya, of maintaining a family, Hritavittaha, one whose wealth is lost, Eva, like Aturaha, suffering. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Thus, by the arrangement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the maintainer of kinsmen is put into a hellish condition to suffer for his sinful activities like a man who has lost his wealth. The example set herein is that the sinful person suffers just like a man who has lost his wealth. The human form of body is achieved by the conditioned soul after many, many births and is very valuable asset. Instead of utilizing this life to get liberation, if one uses it simply for the purpose of maintaining his so-called family and therefore performs foolish, unauthorized action, he is compared to a man who has lost his wealth and who, upon losing it, laments. When wealth is lost, there is no use lamenting. But as long as there is wealth, One has to utilize it properly and thereby gain eternal profit. It may be argued that when a man leaves his money earned by sinful activities, he also leaves his sinful activities here with the money. But it especially mentioned herein that by superior arrangement, deve nasaditam, although the man leaves behind him is his sinful earned money, he carries the effect of it. When a man steals some money, if he is caught and agrees to return it, he is not freed from the criminal punishment. By the law of the state, even though he returns the money, he has to undergo the punishment. Similarly, the money earned by a criminal process may be left by a man when dying, but by superior arrangement, he carries with him the effect, and therefore he has to suffer hellish life. नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवी गौरवाणी प्रचारणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. I humbly bow down to all the assembled Vaishnavas and thank you for giving me an opportunity to purify myself. So for today, I would like to summarize based off of Srila Prabhupada's purport. There are two verses which we saw, and we are in the 30th chapter of third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this talks about, here Lord Kapila is talking to Mother Devahuti on the adverse reactions of the reactions of adverse fruitive activities or doing vikarma. So when one is engaged in doing vikarma activities, what is the fate of such a soul is being explained in this chapter. So in these verses specifically, text 31 and 32, the effect of doing sinful activities after death, when the person goes to a hellish condition, is being mentioned. So this verse, if you take just in isolation from the previous verse, the 29th verse, it's mentioned that if somebody is involved in a sinful activity, the sinful reactions not only comes to this person who is doing it, but also to the family members. But this verse, the 31st verse, seems to be in direct contradiction to it, where it is mentioned that the person who is committing the sin has to go alone to this hell to suffer. But that might bring us to a question like why there is a contradiction. But that's what Srila Prabhupada is explaining in the purport very clearly, that there are two things. One is a direct offender and an indirect enjoyer. And it's mentioned by Srila Prabhupada here that both get punished, but the direct offender gets even more punishment because he's the one who is committing the activity. So that's how we understand this in this contradiction in terms of these two verses. So it's mentioned very clearly that if one is involved in performing sinful activities to maintain his own body and his family members, even though it's mentioned it's under the garb of maintaining the family, the reactions one has to suffer and one has to go to hellish condition to suffer for that sinful activities. And one story which came to my mind is about the story of the hunter Mrigari. The Mrigari was a very cruel hunter, and it's mentioned that he used to let animals die half dead and see them suffer. So that's how he was in his initial condition in terms of being very cruel and performing sinful activities. And all he was doing was to make sure that he will kill the animals, he'll rob people, and then with that money he'll be able to feed his family members. So one so happened by divine grace that they saw he happened to see Narada Muni and Parvata Muni, who had come through the forest, and they saw this hunter Mrigari, and they asked him why he was doing this, and he mentioned that he's doing this for the purpose of keeping his family happy and healthy. So Narada Muni asked Mrigari if the family members would be able to share the portion of the sin he's accruing. Initially, he didn't even know the fact that he was committing sin because he was trained in this by his father, and that's what he knows how to kill an animal. So that's all he knew. So he was totally struck by the fact that he will accrue sinful activities, and he said, "My family members will be able to take my portion of my sin because I'm doing this for them." Then Narada Muni asked him to go and ask his family members. And when he went and talked to his family members, first his wife said, "No, no, no. If there is sin associated with it, it's all yours, and I'm not going to partake any of it." Similarly, when he asked his sons, the same thing, same response came. So then Mrigari understood that nobody is going to partake his sins. So that's the same mood which is explained in this verse, where if one is involved in the process of committing sin, then even though one may do it for the maintenance of his family, but the sinful reactions still come to the person. And Srila Prabhupada here explains about the verse from Chanakya Pandit and how one should be involved in serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead with all the wealth he has. And this verse is explained by Srila Prabhupada in multiple places in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is called Sannimittena Varam Tyago Vinashe Niyati Sati. So it's mentioned that everything within this material world will be destroyed, and therefore one should use everything one has for good purposes. That's what Chanakya Pandit says. But Prabhupada adds a spiritual twist to it and says that well, the Sannimittena, if we take this word and then see what is actually Sannimittena, the person which is Sat, which is always eternal, is Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's what Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport, saying that one should be utilizing one's resources in serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is the highest goal of human life. So that's a couple of things which we saw from the 31st verse. And one thing which I heard, which was very serious and very sober, is a quote from Chanakya Pandit. And Chanakya Pandit says that a spiritualist and a materialist have a specific conception, and one has to have this conception if one wants to be successful in spiritual life or in the material life, depending on what one's conception is. And the conception is, if one wants to be a spiritualist, then he should live the life in a way that the next moment he's going to die. And if one wants to be a materialist, he has to have this conception that he's not going to die any soon. So both of these conceptions are the ones which keep one in the material world or takes one towards the path of spiritual realization. So this was very sobering, and this explains like how Srila Prabhupada always had this mood of constantly serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead and being aware of the fact that death can come any moment. So this reminded me of a verse in Mahabharata where it is said, "Ahani ahani bhutani gachantiha yamalayam sesham stavaram ichanti kim ascharya atah param." So it's mentioned that Yudhishthira Maharaj is saying that the only thing which is very startling is like every day there are so many living entities going to the Himalayam. Ahani ahani bhutani gachanti Himalayam. But Sesham Stavaram Ichchami. But everybody thinks that I'm going to live forever. Sesham Stavaram Ichchami. What is more startling than this? So this is explained by Yudhishthira Maharaj that even though we see multiple people dying, but we still feel that we are going to live forever. So this is the exact mentality of materialist, which is explained by Srila Prabhupada, that we should always be in a mood that we'll have death any moment, not any moment, but the next moment, so that with that urgency, we'll be able to perform the devotional service. So that's one important thing which I heard on this topic. And then on the second verse, which is text 32, there is an analogy which has been mentioned. The analogy which is mentioned is like how by the arrangement of Supreme Personality of Godhead, the maintainer of the kingsman is put into a hellish condition. And this is similar to a man who has lost his wealth. So which means that there are two aspects to this analogy. One is like we all have a wealth, and the wealth is called by the Sanskrit term vitta. So this vitta we have is this human body with which we'll be able to cross this ocean of material world, or we can continue in this material realm. So that's the vitta we have. And if one reads the Vedic injunctions, then one understands that the human life is a vitta or a wealth, because that's the form of life where you can question the existence and you can think about the higher planes of existence. And this is explained in the Vedanta Sutras as atato brahma jignasa. So the purpose of human life is to question like what is the higher purpose of life. So here, so Srila Prabhupada gives this analogy that if one commits sinful activities, then one is put into into hellish conditions, and the mood is that one repents as if like one has lost his wealth. It's not like how a poor man has lost his wealth, but more like a person who had much wealth and he has lost everything. So think about the lamentation one would have if one had if one was extremely wealthy and lost everything, and that would be the mood of repentance for somebody who has done sinful activities and put into hellish conditions. So that's one aspect of it. And the second aspect is like how Srila Prabhupada explains that one may think that if one commits sinful activities at the time of death, one leaves all the sinful activities and also the money he has accrued through sinful means in this world. But it is explained that Devena Asaditam, by arrangement of Supreme Personality of Godhead, it is made sure that the person who commits sinful activities, his sinful reactions are carried over to the next life, and he is actually put into hellish conditions where he suffers for his sin. So that's the second aspect of the analogy which Srila Prabhupada has mentioned here. And so if we think about the chapter 31, the 30, the current chapter we are talking about, it's more like how a living entity goes through life and then dies, and at the time of death, how he's put into hellish conditions if he does sinful activities. And in the next chapter, which is text the the chapter 31, Kapila Dev is going to talk about like how a living entity is born and made it born into a womb of a mother, and how he suffers in the womb of the mother. So it's mentioned that I bring this point up because the point of repentance, which is mentioned here about like a man who has lost his wealth, that's the same mood which the child in the womb has. Srimad Bhagavatam explains that at the seventh month, the consciousness of the child develops. So we know that the consciousness as for living entity exists even at the time of conception, but at the seventh month, the consciousness is well developed because the organs are well developed and everything. So the consciousness becomes more manifest in the child. And it's mentioned that the child is reminded of like the previous life, the sinful activities he had done and everything. And it's mentioned that the child in the womb prays to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in a mood that I will not do any of this sinful activities in my next birth. Please make sure that I serve your lotus feet, is what the child prays. But then the child is again brought into this world, and by the avaranatmika shakti and the prakshepatmika shakti of Maya, the child forgets about the fact that he has prayed, and he is put into this again into this world of illusion, and then he continues in this material creation. So the mood of repentance, which is called